Now, if it wasn't for the Medici, these students might not be doing what they're doing today, because the story goes that Lorenzo il Magnifico was so concerned that standards were dropping in Renaissance Florentine art that he had the idea of founding an academy. He gathered together a number of choice works of art from the Medici's own collections. He hired a tutor, and bang, the modern art school was born.
Lorenzo set up this academy in his own garden, where students would copy from his collection of classical sculptures. And Lorenzo's devotion to pagan rather than religious art moulded the minds of his students. One of them was the young Michelangelo. Lorenzo nurtured his genius when he was just 15 years of age.
Now, if you want visual evidence of the huge impact that Lorenzo the Magnificent had on the young Michelangelo, it's to be found in this room, because here we've got the only two sculptures that he's known to have created while studying in Lorenzo's sculpture garden. Here we've got this beautiful low relief sculpture, a classical technique. It's the Madonna of the Stairs, and he was taught this technique by the sculpture instructor that Lorenzo had installed in the garden. Beautiful piece, but it's still within the religious language. If you want to see how Michelangelo's imagination was really opened up by the influence of Lorenzo, it's here in this great sculpture called The Battle of the Centaurs, which is one of the most precious things in the Michelangelo house, although they've actually allowed me to open the Perspex case so we can see the sculpture in its full glory. Isn't that fantastic? Here you've got these writhing bodies, not a religious reference, not a trace of saintly iconography. This is a purely classical work of art, and its subject is struggle, and in a sense I think that's very appropriate, because what we're seeing here is Michelangelo wrestling the forms of sculpture into a new shape. This is really the birth of Western European secular art.
Lorenzo was to make his most ambitious attempt to embrace the joys of antiquity, not in cramped Florence, but in the Tuscan countryside.
It wasn't enough for Lorenzo to promote classical styles of art. He was fascinated by the whole ancient Roman and Greek way of life. And as a result, he was to commission a truly revolutionary piece of architecture.
This is Poggio a Caiano, a building where Lorenzo's most aristocratic ambitions were realized.
Raised up on a classical arcade with this grand entrance plainly modelled on the portico of an ancient temple. This is a building that looks straight back to the splendour of ancient architecture. It was hugely original and bold, and it's been immensely influential. Think of the Renaissance villa. Think of the English country house with its pillars and pediments. Lorenzo had revived single-handedly the idea of the classical retreat from the cares of the city.
At the heart of the villa is the Great Hall, a room that transports you back in time, bringing to life the myths of the ancient world in full and vivid colour.
Now, although this great space was created sometime after Lorenzo's death, I can't help thinking of it as a huge Pandora's box that he opened. What Lorenzo gave to the Medici family was a totally free sense of the classical world as a kind of space where the imagination could play.
These frescoes, begun in 1519, are wonderfully free interpretations of Roman and Greek stories, a classical vision of delight.
And on the far wall, my favourite fresco in the whole room, created by Pontormo, is the pictorial expression absolutely of an idea that Lorenzo brought into Medici taste, this idea of the countryside as a free space for retreat and for indulgence in pleasure. Under the pretext of painting a classical myth, the myth of Vertumnus and Pomona, nature god, nature goddess, what Pontormo's really painted is a kind of aristocratic idyll. These are the well-fed rich who've come to the countryside to enjoy themselves. I think what this picture is also doing is it's calling down onto the Medici family the ideal of fertility. It's saying, may the Medici always grow as lavishly as these branches, may their seed always be ripened like these fruit in these festoons. Such a transition has taken place. It's almost like a pagan prayer that we will do well. It's on the point of saying that we don't really need God anymore. We've got our own gods, and they're the gods of art. Poggio a Caiano is much more than just a pleasure palace. I think it's a wonderfully eloquent statement of Lorenzo's ambition to be much more than just a merchant. He wants to enter the world of the landed aristocracy, to be a prince even. Just think how far the Medici had come in less than 100 years. But I think the pattern of their meteoric rise can be compared, aptly enough, to the fluctuations of any market. For every boom, there had to be a bust.
Lorenzo had wanted to revive ancient Rome, but this was still Christian Florence. He died in 1492, and with his death, the spectres of heaven and hell returned with a vengeance. The backlash arrived in the shape of a fanatical monk called Girolamo Savonarola.
This parade is held every year in celebration of the memory of Girolamo Savonarola, and it's a symbol of Florence's deeply ambivalent attitude towards its own past, because while they still cherish the memory of the Medici in this city, in celebrating Savonarola's memory, they're also celebrating a man who did his best to tear down and destroy everything that the Medici had spent so long attempting to create.
Savonarola ordered a purge of the pagan art the Medici had revived. Nymphs, naked gods and goddesses, it all had to go.
The flowers marked the spot where he'd organised these immense, almost frenzied religious festivals known as the Bonfires of the Vanities, where all of the people of Florence would be encouraged to bring their most valuable possessions here, including works of art, paintings, sculptures, and to pile them into great bonfires and burn them all for the glory of God. In many ways, Savonarola was the Medici's worst nightmare come to life.